You are listening to the Meta Business Innovation and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Rogers, and if you want to learn from industry leaders about new trends and products that can grow your business, then this is the podcast for you. Today, I'm going to be joined by Molly Austin, a client insights lead for entertainment, and Omar Zayed, our head of industry for entertainment in the US here at Meta, really to talk about and demystify the Gen Z generation and what that actually means and who they really are. And without further ado, let's really jump into it, Molly. So Molly, I'd love to start with you just to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you sort of got into this role of becoming a knowledge expert on Gen Z.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm the client insights lead for entertainment in the US. My role is to bring customized insights to our clients to help fuel their strategies, best reach their customers and potential customers on Facebook and Instagram. And that's where Gen Z has come in. So many of our partners have been trying to figure out how to best speak to this audience. So I've been working over the last few months on insights and recommendations on how to best speak to the Gen Z audience, specifically the older cohort, 18 to 24, on both Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Well, it's great to have you here. And also, Omar, welcome too. And tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. So my team sits within Meta's Global Business Group, and we work with some of the largest TV and film studios on their activations on Meta's platforms of apps and services. Everything from advertising, content, community. It's our team that works with these incredible film and movie studios to bring that to life.
So thank you, Omar, and welcome to the show today. And so I'd love really to start with actually what we mean by Gen Z. We have all these acronyms. We have, baby boomers on the one side to Gen Y, Gen Z, and, even Gen Alpha, I think is the next one that's coming down the line. So as we're going through today, what do we actually mean by Gen Z? Who are they? What sets them apart from the other gens that exist? And what do some people get wrong about this audience in particular?
So there are a couple of things that we stand out for these older Gen Zers, so age 18 to 24. First, based on what we've seen, we think of Gen Zers as creators themselves. Instead of speaking to them in marketing, they really want to feel heard. And we believe we have to create the space for them to feel they have that personal connection, especially to brands. Second, along those lines, they see themselves as trendsetters and tastemakers. In a Meta Commission survey we did in 2020, 68% of 18 to 24s surveyed said that they want to be the first person they know to try something new. And that was compared to 45% of those age 25 plus. And the last thing to mention is that we're seeing with Gen Zers, and you really can't talk about Gen Zers without talking about this, is how important social justice issues are to their identities. You'll probably hear this or read this in every single Gen Z profile out there, but it's worth mentioning again. Brands will really need to find a way to be part of the social justice conversation, or at the very least, not avoid the conversation to be relatable to Gen Zers.
And so now that we have a better understanding of what Gen Z means and the type of traits and the type of behaviors that they seem to show that are slightly different than the other generations, can you tell us a little bit about the actual research that you did and the types of things that you found from when you started looking at them in more deeply?
So we basically looked at the reasons why Gen Z, and I'm talking about 18-24 specifically, come to Facebook and Instagram so we could provide messaging and creative strategies. One of the most important things to keep in mind about this generation is that they don't just use one social media platform. You're not going to find Gen Z saying, I'm a TikTok person or I'm an Instagram person. According to GWI, 82% of Gen Z in the US, age 18 to 24, are on 3 or more social media platforms. So since they're on all these platforms, the key for marketers is going to be to understand their need states on each social media platform and then speak to them accordingly. In our research, we dug into what Facebook and Instagram's quote unquote superpowers are, according to Gen Z, to help marketers understand how specifically to reach them when they're on our platforms. So In 2020, we conducted some research on social media platform association. So basically how people perceive each social media platform. We found that meta technologies have a few superpowers among Gen Z respondents, or what I mean by that is traits they see Facebook and Instagram excelling at above other platforms. So a few examples of those. One, being a place to keep up with their interests. Two, a great place for following influencers and creators. And three, allowing me or them to be updated by brands they care about.
So, Omar, I'd love to get your take as someone who leads a team that works with some of the biggest names and brands in the entertainment space, who are always looking to find ways to, to communicate with that next audience and get them excited about the things that they're creating. Like, how do you see such a creative industry working with a cohort of people or, a generation that is so creative themselves? Like, how are you finding that relationship between those two sets of creators is working? And for brands that aren't necessarily in that industry, like, what do you think they should be doing to really try and engage that audience in a way that you may have seen work very well with the clients that you work with in entertainment?
Mm-hmm. Well, we see these 18 to 24 Gen Zers looking for a personal connection with brands. And we did some research in 2020 showing that the 18 to 24 surveyed are 1.9x as likely as age 25 plus to feel that they have a personal connection with a brand if they have similar beliefs and values as the brand, and are also 1.9x as likely as age 25 plus to feel that they have a personal connection with a brand if they have the same personality. So they've become used to being fed recommendations based on their interests by brands, music, streaming services, video streaming services, and social media platforms. So based on everything we've seen, we believe it's table stakes for them that the brands know them personally and provide content, services, and products accordingly. And when we think about how Gen Zers want to interact with brands on social media specifically, we believe we can think about brands like friends, right? Gen Zers are expecting brands to be just as relatable and authentic as their friends on social media. I mean, think about it. They're interacting with them side by side in feed and in stories. So we think it's cost of entry that their interactions with brands, even as creators, they feel seamless on social media. And the way that we do that is to work towards creating these personal connections.
So I think one of the things you mentioned there was actually quite interesting, which is that they expect things to be relatable and authentic. And picking up, I think, on one of the things that you mentioned as well, Molly, about social justice, like that is a really important topic and issue for this generation that we're finding. And so how are they leaning into these causes that matter to them? Like, what are we sort of seeing within our own data about how this generation is really leaning in and taking on the social justice in a way that we haven't seen before?
Yeah. So on Facebook and Instagram specifically, we're seeing a lot of conversation around social justice for these 18 to 24s. So for example, 18 and 24s talk about social justice on Instagram 3.6 times as much as the average conversation topic for their age group. And this is as of Q3 2021. And then on the Facebook side, 18 to 24s were also more likely than age 25 plus to use hashtags like pro-choice, hashtag women's rights, hashtag speak out, hashtag mental health matters from January to September in 2021. I think the way to tackle this for brands is to think about how they can employ an always on social justice approach. So we often see brands turn on and off social justice messaging after an event or speaking up about issues during a certain time of year, like you might see during Black History Month or Pride Month. But Gen Zers see through that. Are there any creative or engaging ways that brands can create some kind of evergreen strategy where they have a more consistent presence on social media issues? I think this would be a great way to stay engaged with this generation.
And so for brands that have that in mind, one of the things that we've also seen for this generation is that the amount and the ways that they can consume content and media has shifted so much. We've gone from having a few ways to be entertained right now to there being a whole plethora of services that are there to entertain us, and the whole streaming wars that go along with that topic as well. And for brands like that who are trying to find a way to cut through, like understanding how this generation is consuming their content, like Omar, for someone who works with all of these companies that help produce a lot of this content, so how is the way that this generation is consuming that content, how's that going to shape the way that advertisers think about making that content in the future to really, be able to cut through?
Mm-hmm. There is so much great content out there. And I think we can all relate to this. Gen Zers are telling us that they're overwhelmed by it. We conducted some research among streaming trialists and found that 53% of surveyed 18 to 24s in the US agree it's hard to find time to try all of the shows that they've heard good things about. And we're also seeing a shift in young people's purchase behaviors in digital entertainment. According to YPulse's April 2022 media consumption report, since October of 2021, Gen Z and millennials, that's age 13 to 39, are paying for fewer digital entertainment subscriptions, including video streaming. So, think Netflix, Hulu, and music streaming. This is a risk for the industry. So how do we find ways to keep these key subscribers? One thing we're seeing is that young people are turning to their communities and specifically their communities on Meta Technologies to discover entertainment content. We're already starting to see a shift in how people discover entertainment content. Gen Zers surveyed age 18 to 24 are slightly more likely to turn to Meta Technologies to discover entertainment. For example, they're 1.3x more likely to discover TV shows on Meta Technologies compared to age 25 plus. That's 49% versus 37% respectively. And they're 1.1x more likely to discover content on streaming services on Meta Technologies compared to age 25 plus. That's 50% versus 47% respectively. On Facebook specifically, we saw growth in unique searchers. And by searchers, we mean individual people who are using the Facebook search bar. And among the 18-24s from June to October 2021 compared to January through May 2021, searching for the terms movies, TV shows, and music and songs, they increased 38%, 32%, and 48% respectively. All this indicates that they are beginning to lean on their Facebook communities to find out about new entertainment content to dig into. And it's definitely something we're going to be keeping an eye on. We also want to start thinking about how entertainment brands can create these communities and find ways for fans to link together and discover this content.
And if we think about this generation in terms of the things that they've going to have experienced, like I'm nowhere near this generation, unfortunately, anymore. And, when I was growing up, the internet, you still plugged into the wall and, turned the phone line off and you had a 56K modem and that was considered, cutting edge. And right now, the little device that you have in your hand can access everything so much faster. And there's such a plethora of things on there, as we've just described, when it comes to consuming content, that it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in sort of the next phase of technology, which will probably be one of the pivotal things that they go through and look back on fondly, of remembering when, you used to look at a screen in your hand versus it being whatever that might be in such a realm like the metaverse, or technologies like Web3, where, the novelty of, paying a bank, like the banks might, in the future of Web3, who knows what might happen to them. So how do we think Gen Zers are going to shape these, novel and emerging technologies like Web3 and the metaverse?
It's so fascinating thinking about how crucial this generation is going to be to shaping Web3 and the metaverse. The two things I think that are going to be most important for Gen Zers are creators and, like Omar was saying, communities. First, we know that creators are hugely important to Gen Z. And as mentioned before, we can think of them as creators themselves. We're already seeing that certain formats of creator content are more influential than others to get surveyed 18 to 24s to take a shopping action. Stories, short form video, for example, something like Reels, and long form video. This indicates that the more interactive and immersive content from creators works better for Gen Z. And that then the next iteration of interactive media, like the metaverse, may also be hugely important. The other area I think is going to be huge for Gen Z in the metaverse is communities, as Omar had just talked about. People can connect over shared interests through social media and find commonalities that they have never found before in their in-person communities. And I think we're going to see them use the metaverse to really immerse in these more niche communities like gaming and fandoms and hobbies.
So I think we've covered a ton of really interesting insights about this group of people, from, them being overwhelmed by choice in a sense, and we'll go into community to help find that information and that, not source of truth, but that guidance to what to do next. And for something like a brand who's thinking about how they can really communicate with this generation effectively compared to how they would think about older generations, I'd love to close the episode, Molly and Omar, with you both just sharing, what would be some of the practical do's and don'ts for brands trying to reach this audience, given just how much they have going on in their lives day to day and how much choice that they have. If you had to pick a few top priority things that a brand should focus on if they're really wanting to hit home with Gen Z, what would they do? So Molly, I'd love for you to go first.
Okay. So some things I think brands really need to think about with Gen Z. The first when working on your social media marketing, create customized messaging for each platform you're working with, to ensure you're speaking to Gen Zers' need states on each platform. And, when I was mentioning superpowers before, I think this is something that brands really need to be thinking about. What is the superpower of each social media platform, and how can I use it to best speak to my Gen Z audience? Next, find ways for Gen Zers to be able to express themselves. Remember, they want to be creators. Things like interactivity, AR filters, and AR ads. These are formats that can really help them feel more engaged. And then lastly, I love this idea of helping them find and create communities. It's one of the more beautiful things about social media, where we can be where we may be headed too with the metaverse, that we have the opportunity to help people find communities that they may never be able to find otherwise. So just thinking about entertainment, which is my particular expertise, there's such strong fandom communities that I think we can specifically leverage. And then thinking about the don'ts. So be careful about being too overt or selly. Because they want to feel, Gen Zers want to feel aligned with brands and be heard. They want brands to feel like friends, like Omar was saying, and they notice when brands turn on and off, for example, their social justice messaging. It's important to be authentic and keep it natural.
Yeah, building on some of Molly's do's, some do's from my end. One, really start thinking about and creating these pathways to the metaverse. So you're prepared to greet those Gen Zers who are going to be a force of building it. So investing in your creator strategy, ensuring you're using video, reels, and interactivity. And as a second do, and this is specifically for the entertainment brands, we need to surface up content as much as possible to help combat this feeling that Gen Zers have of being overwhelmed. They're so used to having recommendations, brands knowing them well enough to serve the things they want, that it's crucial for us to boost the awareness of this content and just keep up the frequency to remind them of what's available.
Well, thank you both for sharing and for closing on those do's and don'ts and those key takeaways that people should think about as they look to communicate with sort of that next generation of consumer that's really starting to grow in its prevalence and dominance. And that is all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank our guests, Molly Austin and Omar Zayat, for joining us and sharing your valuable insights on the Gen Z audience. There'll be links to any of the resources that have been mentioned in today's show notes as well. So thank you for listening to the Business, Innovation and Technology podcast. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.